Hello, I'm Anne Kruger. Welcome to Landline. Prime Minister Gillard may have angered Australian apple growers with her endorsement of Kiwi imports during a recent trip across the Tasman. But the reality is that 90 years of protection for the Australian apple industry is over. Quarantine formalities will prevent New Zealand apples from hitting Australian shelves until next year. But already traders have tested the market with about 400 tonnes of Chinese apples this year. While they've had little impact on prices inflated by a general shortage, apple industry observers say the trickle of free trade fruit is likely to become a flood within 2 years.
At Bilpin, on the fringe of Australia's largest city, they're preparing to pick the first of this year's apple crop.
Most of the fruit will be up the top, but have a look underneath.
Orchardist Joe Saliba is training some new pickers, and at about $150 a day for each one, labour is one of his biggest costs. But now he must compete with Chinese apples harvested by workers paid just $3 or $4 a day.
No, look, their labour costs are nowhere near ours, and we just like a level playing field, and so look, it's pretty hard to compete. Oh, well, it's just another hurdle for us, really. We feel we've got one of the cleanest industries in the world, and we like to keep it that way, from pests and diseases and that type of thing. So, it is a concern, and, we've got enough fruit here to supply the country and other countries, and, we just want to keep it clean, as it has been for years.
Australia's apple industry is under threat. New Zealand's successful World Trade Challenge to local quarantine regulations has ended 90 years of protection. This year, it's Chinese apple imports, but Kiwi and American fruit is also likely to hit the market in the next 2 years. At Australia's biggest produce markets in Sydney, traders have sold most of about 400 tonnes of Chinese apples shipped to Australia this year.
Last year's season was a little bit light on, and we didn't have the quantity to carry through to the month of February in quantity, and apples were getting a little bit too high in price, so we felt that there's a window there of 6 to 8 weeks where we can bring Chinese apples in and will not affect the Australian product.
Fruit trader Cos Cremona says the reality is that in a global market, imports are here to stay.
As you can see, the quality is excellent. You can't bring rubbish into the country. You've got to bring top quality product. And this is the product here, and reasonably priced.
Can you understand why some growers, say there's no loyalty in commerce?
No, well, look, I understand the issues of the grower. Naturally, they want to protect their own product, which is fine. But in saying that, I think there's a window, an opportunity that we can import product from other countries, which we have been doing for a long time, the likes of citrus, kiwi fruit, and will not affect our local market, our local produce, and maintain a reasonable price for the consumer.
Look, it's been a hard couple of years with the drought-affected areas around Australia. We have had a shortfall. This might be the excuse they're using this year, but I think the Australian public has woken up. They've seen the fruit around. It's not up to Australian standard, the quality of the eating, and we don't know the background of the growing conditions.
Paul Barsom runs FHG Rogers, Australia's longest-running apple wholesaler and marketer. He says he won't sell Chinese apples out of loyalty to his growers.
Oh, look, yeah, but I think you've got to look at, the objective of where we're heading with these imports, and do we stand alone and say, OK, we support our Australian-based growers. They've been with us for generations. Do we really need to, consume a product for over a 2-week period? We've got other quality products like stone fruit available, Tasmanian cherries, to fill the gap till new season apples come along. So I don't think we need to know.
Already, biosecurity concerns have been raised about the Chinese imports. New South Wales Farmers Association's horticulture chairman Peter Darley says this damaged fruit failed the quarantine inspection system.
These are 2 apples that were taken out of a box of Chinese apples, and we explained at the Senate inquiry that if there was a damaged apple to come into this country, there is the possibility that that apple could be also already infected by the Asian fruit fly, vinegar fly, coming out of there. And they said that in the inspection service in China, there would be no blemished fruit whatsoever or marked skin fruit.
Coles and Woolworths account for about 2/3 of all the apples sold in Australia, and they say they won't be selling any of the Chinese apples.
Well, it's incredibly important to the Australian industry and our own family, who we've had terrific support from both the major retailers. Both Woolworths and Coles have publicly stated that they're not going to take imported product apples whilst it's available in Australia, and we thank them for that as an industry, and their support has just been fantastic for us.
Scott Montague's family owns one of Australia's biggest vertically integrated apple enterprises, with growers in 3 states. Both Mr Montague and Apple and Pear Australia's Chief Executive John Durham believe the impact of Chinese and other imports will be much greater next year and beyond.
Well, we have Montague Group within ourselves have probably 40 to 50 growers on which we handle. The industry is very nervous about any reinvestment within the industry, turning over their older varieties into new varieties, new styles of planting, new higher producing plantings. They're very nervous about spending that money in this industry, not knowing where we're going to sit with the possible imports.
There's certainly a consumer backlash in Australia against Chinese apples. We can see that already by just some of the comment that's been made publicly and the awareness. But I think as time goes on and the sensitivities aren't there, those traders will be wanting to ramp up their businesses so that in that Chinese season, which will be October through till January, there'll be more and more product come out of China.
John Durham says the greater risk to Australia's industry will come from apples grown in New Zealand and the US to first world standards.
New Zealand apples are very, very similar to our own in terms of the growing method, production methodologies, the quality parameters that they have to meet, and likewise for the American production. So, and of course, Australian consumers are now consuming, in round figures, about 30% of our crop is in Granny Smith, and the other 30% is another 30% in Pink Lady, and those are the favourites of Australian consumers. There's not a lot of production of Granny Smith in New Zealand. There's a little bit of production of Pink Lady. Likewise in the US, Granny Smith, there is some production there, and Pink Lady too. So probably America's a big challenge for the industry when they come on stream because they're counter-seasonal.
Australia's apple industry has been contracting for the last 20 years, and at Bilpin, when these pictures were taken, there were about 80 commercial growers. Today, there are only 4 selling fruit through the Sydney markets.
The terms of trade for many orchards has declined steadily over the last 20 years, and increasingly orcharding is becoming a high turnover, low margin business.
Can the industry still be competitive now in the face of cheap imports from China?
I think in Bilpin, there's always going to be opportunities to actually sell directly to the public. Bilpin's in a unique situation because it's so close to Sydney. It's within an hour's 40 minutes drive of Sydney, which is 20% of Australian population.
Peter Malcolm has been the District Horticulture Officer for the Sydney Basin for most of the last 20 years. He says clever growers such as Joe Saliba are using new densely planted dwarf rootstock to stay competitive.
He's getting very good yields. He's probably expecting close to 45, 50 tonnes per hectare. I think this is his 3rd crop. So growers like Joe have actually demonstrating that they can survive, but increasingly they are finding it hard too because their margins are being squeezed.
On their 23-hectare mixed orchard, Simon and Margaret Tadrosse produce about 250 tonnes of apples and are among the first growers to land fruit in Sydney each year.
Becoming harder every single solitary year. You've got so many elements to compete with nowadays. We've got the importation of Chinese apples. You've got the rising costs of everything, and we're still basically getting the same price for our fruit that we were years and years ago. So it's just getting harder and harder every year.
The extended Tadrosse family relies on a retail outlet and value-adding its seconds by making apple pies. Now, like other small bilpin growers, they're hoping they can cash in on a growing pick-your-own market.
So how we pick the fruit is we pull it off the tree like that and then pop it in the bag.
They're leasing out individual trees for an annual fee. The Bilpin Public School has adopted 4 trees.
We look after the tree all year. Then when it's harvest time, they own the tree. They come, they pick their fruit, and they take all the fruit home with them. And they probably generally yield about 50 to 60 kilo off an apple tree, a fully matured apple tree.
Disability carer Kathryn Roots adopted 2 trees for her grandchildren.
I just thought it would be a great gift for my grandchildren and my family. And any of the produce that we don't actually pick, because we can pick up to 60 kilos, will be picked by Margaret, and the produce will be sold and donated to Westmead Children's Cancer Foundation. So I just figured it was a really good thing to do.
Up the road at Bilpin Springs Orchard, none of the 3,000 trees here yield a single piece of fruit for the markets. Instead, up to 400 people a day pay to pick as much as they can each week.